Welcome to the LBC Book Club. Every Monday night we talk to a leading author or a couple of authors about their newly published books, and today I'm delighted to welcome Paddy Ashdown to the studio. His autobiography, A Fortunate Life, has just been published in paperback. It's published by Aurum at $9.99, very cheap price. It's a very thick book, for 400 odd pages. Paddy, welcome to the programme.
Nice to be with you. Sorry I couldn't make it the other day when you booked me.
No, not at all. Well, actually, I'm rather glad that you've come this week for obvious reasons.
I'm sure you are.
And we will talk a little bit about current political events a little bit later. If you have a question that you'd like to put to Paddy Ashdown, the former Liberal Democrat leader, he's here with me until 10 o'clock. The number to call is 0845 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850. Email Ian, IAIN, at lbc.co.uk, or you could even tweet us at LBC973. I only discovered today you're on Twitter, so I've followed you on Twitter now.
Yes, but I don't go to it or tweet. I have to say, do you want a confession?
Go on.
Somebody put me on there during the general election. And listen, I love technology.
You do? You're a bit of a gadget guru, aren't you?
Yeah, but I love also, in my present life, I don't have a secretary. It's the first time in my life I can decide my own diary myself, and that means keeping in touch, making sure that my wife's kept in touch as well with the appointments. And you can do all that on cloud now. But I just haven't got time, I'm afraid. I just haven't got time. I know it's a shocking thing to say, to tweet, but I shall have to learn to do it and do it. I gather I have 2,000 followers on tweet.
I have 20,000.
Okay, all right.
Well, I know you're competitive.
But on the other hand, I've never tweeted, and you tweet regularly. So the fact they seem to have stayed with me regularly, even though I'm completely silent,
I'll have to give you a lesson. Now, let's start talking about the book, because that is, after all, why we're here. I read it, when was it? A couple of years ago when it came out in hardback. And I actually found the period that you write about before your political career actually just as interesting, if not more so, than the bit you write about politics. And normally, I don't bother with people's childhood or university or pre-political career. I want to read about their political career. But you had such a fascinating early life. Just take us through it for a minute.
It's the kind of life you can really, I suppose, no longer live. I mean, it was a life that was possible to live if you were young in the 50s and 60s, early 70s, when the empire was in existence and when your horizons are very wide. Now, horizons are wide today in a different way. But, this is coming out of the end of the period when a quarter of the world was coloured red. So, I am a child of empire. My family went out to India in 1805 and stayed till I left in 1946. When we left India after nearly 200 years, 150 years there, I remember seeing the first partition riots. That's something that's dogged me all my life. What happens when this terrible beast of dogma, religion and extremism gets loose, because the first thing I did was go back to Northern Ireland, where my family had, my mother came from, my father came from the south. So here I am in Northern Ireland, the son of a Protestant mother and a Catholic father, which wasn't an easy thing to be. Settled down in Northern Ireland, went to school in England, and then joined the Royal Marines. And from there, in the little wars at the end of empire, the wars in the jungles of Borneo, in Aden, with the war in Belfast. The troubles in Belfast were, of course, not the end of empire, but they came shortly afterwards. So it was the kind of life that was lived then. And at the age of 19, I was commanding 30 men in the jungles of Borneo. Then I learnt Malay. Then I did a special services course, joined the Special Boat Service, commanded a Special Boat Service unit in the Far East, in the process of which I thought I was very good at languages and tried to teach myself Chinese. Couldn't do that because it's a very difficult language, and I was the only foreigner in the night school in Singapore. The rest were all Chinese, trying to learn their mother tongue. So I applied to do 2.5 years as a student, aged in my late 20s, in Hong Kong University. Lo and behold, a certain intelligence service loosely connected with the British government turned up and said, look, we don't have too many people who can speak Chinese and look after themselves. Would you like to join? Seemed like a good idea to me, so I did. Found myself as a diplomat doing a sort of double job, a day job and a night job in Geneva at the height of the Cold War, when, of course, the espionage business was in full flow. And it was then, really, I have to confess to you, that I was originally, when a young Royal Marine officer, and it was regarded as tantamount to treason, a supporter of the Labour Party. I parted company with Labour when I realised they weren't interested in reform to our political system, and were tied to the trades union movement in 1969. Then in Geneva, we were there during 1974. You're far too young to remember this.
I do remember 1974
well,
very well. I was 12, but I do remember it.
Well, you remember two elections, 3-day week, who rules Britain. And there we were living on the shores of Lake Geneva. Very good life, very interesting life, 2 kids. A little sailing boat in front of we were on the very edge of Lake Geneva, skiing in the summer, in the winter, walking in the summer. But both my wife and I decided that there was not much point living a life of ease and some enjoyment if your country was going to pot. I mean, I know that sounds a bit sort of self-righteous, but that's true. So, to the enormous surprise of all my colleagues, I gave it up to come back into politics. And by the way, not just politics, but liberal politics. And we were then at 5% in the opinion poll. My leader was about to be arraigned for conspiracy to murder at the Old Bailey. And the seat that I lived in, I wouldn't try to represent anywhere else, had been Tory since 1910. They didn't count their majorities.
So you like to challenge, that's what you're saying.
I can't resist it when people say, you can't do that. That's impossible.
What I find,
so into politics. So that's a very short potted history of a very long, uncoordinated, and, if I may say so, unthought through. So I call it a fortunate life. This all happened to me by accident. It didn't happen because of my wisdom or choice.
Well, I thought it was important that we started with that, because I don't think that many people know about that aspect of your life, and I never understood why, when you became Liberal Democrat leader, you didn't make more of it.
Because I don't like that. I mean, look, for 2 reasons, Ian. I think, the kind of person who goes around saying, when I was here, when I did that. The House of Commons, quintessentially, and you know it very well. You've been a commentator on it, you understand it extremely well. House of Commons judges you by who you are, not what you've been. Do you remember when Roy Jenkins came back with this dizzy position of the President of Europe, or the President of Europe? And, he was destroyed because nobody was at all interested. How you do in the House of Commons? So I never allowed my people during my elections, when I was party leader, to make much use of it. I just don't like that kind of thing. I think you stand before the people for what you are, not for what you've done.
Was it partly because it's maybe not the sort of career that goes down particularly well among certain left-wing liberals?
No, absolutely not. No, really not. I mean, really not. They begged me to make use of it, because the opposite was true. It's an unusual, I suppose, career path for any politician, but most particularly for a liberal. By the way, it was being in special forces and understanding in particular the value of the man who I worked with. They were all men, no women, in very small teams, was not dependent on their class or upbringing. It was dependent on their merit. And I believe in meritocracy, and I believe in freedom. So that's what made me a liberal. But nevertheless, it has to be an unusual curriculum vitae for a liberal, now a Liberal Democrat, and they begged me to use it, and I never allowed them to do so.
How would you describe your period as Lib Dem leader? Because you're a leader. I mean, you started off.
I was leader for 11 years.
In a terrible time when there was all the when the Liberal Democrats and the Social Democrats merged. You had the sort of Owenite fringes causing a bit of trouble. And I mean, we think the Liberal Democrat ratings in the polls now are bad, but at that point you were barely.
Now, I am the only
rated in the polls.
I am the only political leader in Britain who has presided over a political party represented in the opinion polls by an asterisk, denoting that no detectable support could be found for us anywhere in the land. It seems to have fallen my lot to pick up wrecked organisations and put them back on their feet. I don't know why. I mean, again, not my judgment, just my fate. But when I went to Yeovil, there were 2.5 members, and we were third behind the Tories, and it took me 8 years to build the seat up so that we could win it. 2 periods of unemployment. Jane and I were down to our last £100. And lo and behold, the same thing happened with the Liberal Democrats. But the reason that we were able to do that is actually not to do with me, I have to say. It is to do with this extraordinary quality of the average Liberal Democrat, just sheer bloody-minded determination, whatever the odds, to continue to exist and put forward their point. And by the way, that's very relevant for the present time. I mean, they were magnificent. People said to me all my life, I suppose I have been involved in elites, the commandos, the special forces, this particular organisation, connected to the Foreign Office. But I discovered that the really biggest joy I've ever had was leading this rebellious, turbulent, difficult, unruly, but nevertheless wonderful collection of people who really believe in something that I think is important for our country, called the Liberal Democrats. Perfectly ordinary people, but capable of doing extraordinary things. By the way, at the moment, since we're in a book programme, and I won't let you forget it, I'm now writing my 7th book. And the book is the 70th anniversary book of the Cockleshell Heroes. The famous raid of the Royal Marines, the foundation of the SBS, when 10 Marines paddled into the Gironde estuary in December 1942 and blew up German ships, something I thought they could do. And 2 got drowned, 6 got caught and shot, 2 got back over in fact, the greatest raid of the Second World War, I think, led by a remarkable Marine Royal Marine officer called Blondie Hasler. Blondie had the same view. He voted, by the way, Liberal all his life, Blondie Hasler, for the same reasons, when it really was treachery in the armed services to do so during the 40s and 50s. And the extraordinary thing about what he did was that, we think of special forces and commanders there as these carefully muscle-bound, specially chosen people. He just took ordinary people. It was the most extraordinary gift of leadership, to take ordinary people and invest them with a self-confidence, knowledge and courage to be able to do probably the greatest commando raid of the war. Now, that's what I believe in. I believe in the idea that politics should be about... Politics should be dedicated to the proposition that there is something extraordinary about every human being, and that we should create a system which, if it can maximise the potential of all of them. That's what I'm dedicated to, and that's what Blondie Hasler is dedicated to, and I think that's what Liberals are dedicated to.
We'll talk a little bit more about leadership in just a second. If you have a question for Paddy Ashdown, the number to call is 0845 6060 973. The time now is 9:16. And you're listening to the LBC Book Club. I have Paddy Ashdown with me until 10 o'clock. If you'd like to ask him a question, the number to call is 0845 6060 973. And the reason he's here is because he's just published the paperback edition of his autobiography, which is called A Fortunate Life. It's $9.99 in paperback, published by Aurum. We were talking a little bit about leadership there, Paddy. Who do you think in your lifetime are the greatest leaders that you've either met or that you just think, well, that they actually changed the world?
Well, I suppose my hero, my political hero at all events, is somebody as unlike me as you could conceivably get, is William Wilberforce. I think as a leader, he was invested with moral courage. He was invested with extraordinary understanding of what was important. And he persuaded, and that's the right word, persuaded, because he had no other force and power at his disposal, the nation to abandon a policy from which the policy of slavery, of course, from which vast numbers of people, indeed you could have even argued the entire economy, was actually based. So he just persuaded Britain, against, as it were, its own at least financial interests of a vast part of Britain. And at the end of it, when he'd finally abolished slavery, he turned around and said, now you must compensate the slave owners because you've been involved in this too. He wrote a letter to a friend near the end of his life, maybe even his last letter, I can't remember it perfectly, Ian, but it goes something like, we did not march as though to an obelisk on the skyline. And I love this next phrase, we walked the highways and byways, gathering friends like flowers along the way. And yet he achieved this extraordinary thing. If there is a dividend to be gained from those who achieve things through moral strength alone and through the force of persuasion, then it ought to go to Wilberforce, in my view.
How do you think the Liberal Democrats view you now?
View me?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, old Paddy, I suppose, rumbling away in the background, I don't know how they view me, you better ask them. I'm no good judging what other people think of me. You can better ask them.
Do you think maybe you quit as leader too early?
No, I'd done 11 years, for God's sake, Ian. As I said earlier on, you get less for murder these days. Look, the Liberal Democrats, I think, are lucky enough to happen to have had the leader they need at the time they get him. No hers yet. I hope there will be soon. In David Steele's day, you needed a person who was very subtle about he was a manoeuvre politician. He was a positioner. He knew where to position the party precisely. I'm a position taker. Mrs. Thatcher was a position taker. David Owen, I suppose, was a
conviction politician.
I was a conviction politician. But at this stage, what they probably needed to drag them out of the disaster was a sort of commando climber who was prepared to go up the face first. But after 11 years, to be very honest, I was getting sort of grumpy with them, and they were getting quite grumpy with me. I detected it, even if they didn't, and they liked not to remember it with hindsight. Yeah, I think it's very important. I remember saying to my wife, I want to go, and people said, why is he going? Then not when they said, why isn't he going? And then they got Charles. And Charles, the party was much more comfortable with at those times. He wasn't leading from the front like a commando officer. But they liked him, and the electorate
leading
liked him.
From the couch.
Well, whatever he was leading pretty well.
Well, he did a great job, I think.
The party did extremely well in those days, arguably its best result ever. Though I might say that its greatest leap forward was under me. Charles achieved the highest position, so no mean leader that as well. So I think we have, by and large, got the leaders we need at the time.
I'm probably one of the few people that have read both volumes of your diaries.
You get a special
page
prize.
to page.
You get a special prize.
The theme that was running through them, obviously, was the possibility of Tony Blair offering electoral reform and indeed a coalition after the 1997 election. Now, in the end, that didn't happen for all sorts of reasons.
The biggest reason was because he wanted us to do what I would not do. He wanted us to give up our independent existence and become part of the Labour Party. And I was, then as now, the one thing I would not do, and I would not accept any price for, and I know that Nick Clegg will not do, and if he did, that would be the moment that I'd part company from, and I'm sure he won't, is in any way place at jeopardy or prejudice the total independence of the Liberal Democrats as a third force in British politics, standing for something different from the other two. So that was the reason. But go on with your question.
Well, I wondered if your decision to quit was anything to do with the fact that you did feel let down, and you just thought, well, this is a sort of cut-off point in British politics.
No, I really didn't. I mean, look, the truth is that both of us, maybe we suffered a bit, both of us, from being outsiders in our party, coming from, not born into the bowels of the party in the way that Gordon Brown was.
So you're talking about you and Tony Blair, or you and me?
No. Me and Tony Blair. Maybe, therefore, we believed that if something was rational, then it could be done. Maybe we underestimated the tribal forces in our party. Now, he hit the tribal forces in his party in the form of Gordon Brown and John Prescott before I hit them in mine. But if he'd have said yes about that last final proposition, and I'd take it to my party, I may have had them say no as well. So, no, I think what we suffered from was the operation of political force majeure, not betrayal on either side. There are some who love to believe, Blair, deceived Paddy, never meant it any time. Well, if he didn't mean it, then how come Gordon Brown and John Prescott were so desperate to stop him? Because they thought he did. I mean, they knew him better than anybody else. So no, it wasn't that. I'll tell you what was an element, quite close to what you suggest. I had pursued this policy that the realignment of the left was what we should be achieving. I'd pursued it by taking considerable risks to work with Tony Blair both before the election and afterwards. When that policy failed, although we got a huge amount out of it, PR for Scotland, a Scottish Parliament, European Convention on Human Rights, freedom of information, a Parliament or things we've been fighting for years, when ultimately that policy failed to deliver electoral reform for Britain as well as for the parts of Britain, I was operating a policy that hadn't succeeded. The right thing for a leader to do under those circumstances is stand aside and make way for somebody else.
One of the most...
But I tell you, there wasn't an ounce of sense of betrayal on the one hand or grumpiness with the party on the other. I may have been getting short-tempered with them, but I understood where they were coming from, and in the end it was my policy that didn't succeed, or at least didn't succeed in the end, although it succeeded a lot of things along the way, and therefore it was time for me to go.
One of the most difficult times for you was in the 1992 election when the so-called Paddy Ashdown episode happened. I don't want to go into the detail, but I mean, you talk about it very honestly in the book. If super injunctions had existed in those times, would you have been tempted?
Oh, it's a hypothetical question. I don't know. I can't tell you. I hope not, because I really don't think that they are appropriate. But I mean, I hope not. And, I mean, that I did use an injunction then in order to give me space and time to be able to inform my family and to be able to inform my constituency. I don't think that was unreasonable. And in the end, you know, when I believed that had all been done, I said, OK, here's the truth, and I simply couldn't talk about it.
Because it was an interesting episode in that actually you emerged from that, I think, as a more substantial figure, which not many people do from episodes like that, do
Look,
they?
If that's true, and the opinion polls showed it a bit, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it as a way to make progress in politics. I mean, I really wouldn't. I mean, you know, I think if that's true, it's more because of the generosity of the British people and the wisdom of Paddy Ashdown, I'm bound to say. You know, if it's true, maybe the ultimate sin before the electorate isn't the sin, it's lying about it. Maybe, you know, those who've tried to lie about it,
Yeah. Well, we'll be talking more to Paddy Ashdown in just a few moments' time. If you'd like to ask him a question, the number to call is 0845 6060 973.
LBC 97.3. Call 0845 6060 973. Text 84850. Ian Dale.
And Clive Bull will be here from 10. In fact, he's here now. Hello, Clive.
Hi, Ian. Yes, here from 10, and tonight, lots of things to talk about. We're going to kick off looking at NHS reforms. There's been a lot of talk tonight, and not least with you, about the politics of all of that. But I'd like to talk about the actual reforms and whether there is a public appetite for some kind of change.
I there is in the Liberal Democrats.
Yes. I think it's one of those things that people don't really know the facts about. You know, I don't think they really know what the reforms entail, but people have been telling me for many years that they think the NHS should be shaken up. So I'm going to try and talk to people who work in the NHS and, of course, all of us who use it. We're also going to talk about insurance. After the banking industry have given up its legal fight over payment protection insurance, and they could end up compensating thousands of people who were missold it effectively. And more broadly, I'd just like to know whether people ever think that you get good value out of insurance, because I'm highly sceptical myself. A lot of the time I just think, why am I doing this? You know,
well, certainly on payment protection things and on these extended warranties that you get offered at, well, no, let's not even say where we get offered them. I never, ever take them out.
Yeah. And much surprise today as the Queen orders her iPad.
Really?
Yes, apparently.
Does it have a royal crest on it?
It
I think it should.
Have a royal crest engraved.
It'll have a royal crest app. You can press it and you get the whole royal family.
I think there is a Buckingham Palace app, isn't there? Yeah, I think
you get
so.
the whole royal family laid out, and you can tell you who the next marriage is going to be between them. All that. Great stuff.
Yes, so I thought we'd talk about the Queen getting an iPad and whether we're a bit too quick to stereotype people by their age and their ability with technology as well, because people have been sort of...
Well, I'll tell you, you're talking to the right man here. I mean, I don't know how old Paddy Ashdown is, but if there's a gadget, rest assured he's got it.
I was looking at some Twitters. A friend of mine sent me some Twitters after my appearance.
Tweets, they call.
Tweets, whatever they are, after On Question Time last Thursday, and somebody said, this guy's nearly 2,000 years old.
Well, Clive's only 1950 years old, so and we will be hearing more from him at 10 o'clock. Thanks very much, Clive. Now, you're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and Paddy Ashdown, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats. He's published the paperback edition of his autobiography called A Fortunate Life. We'll be talking about your time in the Balkans a little bit later, Paddy, but I just want to spend a few minutes on current political issues, because you've been fairly ubiquitous on our TV screens and on our radio over the past few days after the local elections. And I've sort of taken you to task a little bit. I'd written an article which unfortunately got spiked in the Mail on Sunday yesterday because they decided to print one by the Prime Minister instead. I mean, can you believe the cheek of it? But I've sort of got rather irritated with the number of Liberal Democrats who, after these elections, seem to be going around the TV studios thinking that their bargaining position has got better. After those election results, how could that possibly be?
We don't deal in bargaining positions. I mean, you may do, but we don't. This is a coalition. It's about honouring the coalition agreement in spades, and you may bank on that. And it's about making sure this country, as a partnership government, don't love each other rather less, I suppose, after 3 weeks of this campaign. But we want to do business together because we believe in the big things like putting the economy right. That's not about bargaining positions. Anything in the coalition agreement is not about bargaining. Anything beyond the coalition agreement, of course, that's about getting it through the House of Commons.
And what about...
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
The NHS, the Lansley reforms, the NHS, are not in the coalition agreement.
But they were agreed to by your Liberal Democrat Minister, Paul Burstow.
They may be, but they're not in the coalition agreement. And when those come, for instance, in the House of Lords, they'll have to be voted on to go through the House of Lords. The Liberal Democrats there will vote according to what they believe to be right and what they believe to preserve the NHS as they see it. That's not about bargaining. It's about staking our position on the thing we believe in very strongly and using our democratic force to do so.
And what about, you were on television complaining about David Cameron's behaviour in the AV referendum, saying, I think it was you that said that broke something in the coalition agreement.
No, I never said that.
Well, you were saying that he was traducing Nick Clegg. Now, I can't think of a single occasion when David Cameron even made reference to Nick Clegg in the AV referendum.
No, it's not what I said, Ian. What I said is this, and listen, it's said, so I don't see any point in crawling over it again. Because it's seriously damaged trust. I mean, first of all, the agreement, as I read in the newspapers between the two men, was that they would state their positions, of course, but wouldn't take a front-running position in this campaign in order precisely to preserve the collegiality of the coalition. I fear that Mr. Cameron did not do that. And he left Nick Clegg quite exposed. But my main complaint was this. The Tory party's money funded the No campaign to more than 90% of its total funds.
But so what? I mean, the Electoral Reform Society funded the Yes campaign.
But hang on, the Electoral Reform Society is not a political organisation.
So
but hang on, Ian, if you'll allow me to finish and then criticise me. The Tory party, which is in coalition with us in government, funded the No campaign to 90% of their funds, and that No campaign chose as its central proposition the denigration and attempted destruction of our leader. So Mr. Cameron said, nothing to do with me, Gov. I can't control this. I would say, pull the other one. If you fund a campaign to 90% of its money and allow it then to be operating in a way that destroys your closest coalition partner, and by the way, one who has stuck through with the coalition with tremendous determination and courage, then I don't think that is betrayal, it's just stupid. By the way, if you ring Downing Street, they will say they couldn't affect the disgraceful campaigning of the No campaign because it was run by Labour. So hang on, the Tories give a campaign 90% of its funds and allow it to be run by Labour to destroy the principal coalition partner. And the third thing is that when the Prime Minister, if he wasn't involved in this at all, when he was asked him to dissociate from a campaign whose primary thread was to destroy his coalition partner, by the way, also to conduct politics in Britain, which no Prime Minister should support, he comprehensively refused to do that. Now look, that's the situation. I think we Lib Dems were entirely entitled to feel as angry about it as we did. That's behind us now. We've got to get on with the business of government. Unfortunately, the process of building trust in this business relationship is going to have to be re-established because there isn't much trust left after all that. But we can do it, and we will fulfil the task to which we set our hand, which is taking this country through the economic crisis left by Labour.
I always went from the point of view that this coalition would last until 2015, and I still actually believe that.
Me too.
But I think the possibility of it finishing before that has been heightened by what's happened over the past 3 or 4 weeks.
I think it is placed more in jeopardy. By the way, I'm pretty clear I know why Mr. Cameron did it. He was spooked by his right wing who said, don't you dare lose this referendum. So he chose to... That's a word for it, but I'll try and choose a less...
Well, he tried to campaign. I mean, that's not unheard of for political leaders.
He broke his word to appease his right wing. Now, I don't think that's helpful. So, look, I think I would say this, that my view is your view, that this will maintain. The Liberal Democrats will hold to this. We believe this is right for the country, and it will maintain for the fixed year term that we have set our hand to. It isn't going to be easy, but it will be done, and we will do it, not because we love the Tories, but because we love our country and believe it's necessary to do this, to put our country right. I hope in the course of those 4 or 5 years people will understand the difference between compromise and betrayal. We are not the government. Of course we can't deliver our policies at the last election. We weren't elected into government. There's a difference between compromise and betrayal, and I think the intelligent British electorate will understand that. But there is no doubt.
They didn't on Thursday, though, did they?
Well, no, they didn't, but maybe it's early days yet. I mean, you know, I've always said that you know, none of us believed that this would deliver an electoral dividend. We didn't do this because we believed it would advantage our party. We were very clear that electorally it wouldn't. Now, was Thursday a bit more damaging than we expected? Yes. What did it add extra pain that our Conservative partners acted in the way that they did, which we've just described? Yes. But I've always believed that if it's a dividend for this, it would come in 4 years' time when hopefully, if George Osborne's economic judgment is right, and I think it is, we will have been part of a government that's seen through this country through a terrible crisis created by Labour. We'll have experienced ministers, and we can go to the electorate as an independent party. With experience of government, with a good record behind us, while Labour has stood at the side and shouted like superannuated students. Under those circumstances, I believe the party can benefit. But at the moment, this is about the country, not the party.
Let's take a call from John in Northwood, who's got a question related to this.
This isn't John, the taxi driver.
It isn't. No, this is John from Northwood. Hello, John.
Hello, Paddy. Good evening. I remember years ago now, David Steele told the Liberal Assembly, go back to your seats, go back to your constituencies and prepare for government.
1981 in Llandudno, I believe.
Be careful what you wish for, John.
Same year as another royal wedding and Bucks Fizz winning the Eurovision Song Contest. But in all seriousness, haven't you made a bit of a hash of it so far? I mean, wasn't particularly the debacle on student fees. That was a rejection of something that the Lib Dems had in the manifesto. They've gone back on that. And what's your advice to Nick Clegg now?
Keep going the way you've been going. Look, John, here's the first thing. Let me just repeat this again. When we made the pledge, now, you can argue whether we were wise to do so. I advised against it at the time, and I tried to get my party to not continue with its policy on student fees almost as my last act as the leader, but I was Democratic Party and they didn't agree with me. But when we signed up to that, you know, we said, if you get a Lib Dem government, this is what we'll deliver. John, you may have noticed you haven't got a Lib Dem government. I mean, if you sign a manifesto, the manifesto is about what you do in government. If we can't get ourselves into the idea in this country that whenever two parties work in partnership together for the national good, which by and large is what most people want us to do, they can't deliver their manifesto, they have to make compromises. Now, if we can't get ourselves into that idea, and it may take time, then you'll never again have the kind of partnership governments you've got at present. Let me just say one other thing to you. So, you know, it was tough, it was difficult. The mistake, it seemed to me, is not what we did. The mistake may well have been to sign up in high profile to that pledge. But we could have done no other. And by the way, the student fees system that we're introducing now is actually hugely advantageous, again, when measured against the student fees that students are having now under the Labour government. And I even have students coming to me saying, can I transfer to your fees system because it's far better? Leave that to one side. If you say we've been making a hash of it, John, how about this? We've taken 1.3 million people out of tax altogether. Those are the poorest in our country. We have raised the tax threshold in Britain. We have passed legislation to say that never again will we have the disgrace that we had under Labour where children were in detention. We have introduced a system of apprenticeships right across the face of Britain. Now, you know, all of those things have happened because of the Liberal Democrats. So you simply can't say that we have no effect on this government. If there'd been a Tory government, none of them would have happened.
John, thank you very much indeed for your call. We'll come back to Paddy Ashdown in just a couple of minutes. The time now is 9:45. To give you due warning that tomorrow we'll be hosting a debate on the first year of the coalition from 8 o'clock here on LBC 97.3 from the RSA. Next week on the Book Club, we'll be joined by Kay Burley from Sky News, who's written a racy novel called First Ladies, which I'm about to start reading. And also Catherine Mayer, the London editor of Time magazine. She's written a book called Amortality. Haven't got a clue what that means, but again, we'll be finding out next week on the LBC Book Club. I'm with Paddy Ashdown, who's just published the paperback edition of his autobiography, A Fortunate Life. Just to round off on current the current political situation, Paddy, you talked about how the Liberal Democrats can fight the next election. How can they differentiate themselves from the Conservatives? So, I mean, assuming the coalition does last till the next election, Nick Clegg seems to be relying on the electorate being grateful for a successful 4 or 5 years, but electorates don't really reward successful governments, do they? They punish unsuccessful ones, but they really want to know what you're going to do over the following 5 years. And how can the Liberal Democrats write a manifesto that anyone will believe after the last one?
Well, I just don't agree with you in your first proposition here. And there's got a very clear example of it in last Thursday's election. Why do you think Alex Salmond did so well? Not because the Scottish people want to have independence, but because, frankly, he was able to show them a record of rather good government of Scotland on a minority basis, and they were prepared to give him the chance. And I think that, when you come to choose at the next election, and Labour stood at the side, as I think they will, not because Ed Miliband wants them to, but because they've been out of power for 11 years and that's the way parties behave, they'll just act as a protest party. And I think if we are able to be successful, then participating in that will help. And above all, we'll be able to answer the question at last that, we won't vote for you because you haven't got the experience, because you have very experienced ministers. And then what happens? Well, in a sense, you have really a sort of two-way question now. If you've had a coalition and it's delivered something good, maybe the British people will want to have another coalition. Maybe they will do what the German people have for ages now. We don't want one of them in charge. We want them to be moderated by another party.
That's kind of dictated by their electoral system.
Well, yes, it might be, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be done without that electoral system. I mean, it was done in Britain without the electoral system last time. So let's wait and see. And under those circumstances, the Lib Dems could put forward a two-pronged manifesto. Look at our record. This is what we've held delivered. If we're in government next time, this is what we stand for. The more you vote for us, the more of this we'll be able to influence and get. Now the decision's up to you. And we go back to the same position that Nick Clegg argued for at the last election. We're not the kingmakers, the public are. And it's up to them to decide who will be in government or what combination of parties will be in government and whether the Liberal Democrats should be a part of it. I think that's a very straightforward proposition and actually one which I think could be quite good.
Do you think it's been a mistake to constantly repeat the mantra, vote for us, we're quite good at stopping the Tories being Tories? Because that seems to be what a lot of Liberal Democrats have been saying over the past few months. Without us, these wicked Tories would have been doing all sorts of terrible things.
I'm not sure that's true, because I think there's another way of putting that. Would that by itself be a powerful electoral message? Well, not without power. I mean, we all remember what the Tories have done unconstrained in the past. None of us within our lifetimes can forget Mrs. Thatcher and the excesses.
Indeed, and nor would we wish to.
Well, listen, I understand. She was the greatest Prime Minister I've had the privilege to serve with, although I fought her tooth and nail all the way. But nevertheless, some of the things that they did, many people believe, and I'm one of them, destroyed one of our unique aspects of Britain, our sense of value of the things that we hold in common. And I think you'd agree with that if I know where you come from in the Tory party.
Actually,
come on.
I wouldn't, but we haven't got enough time to go
There's no
into
such
that.
thing as society. Well, never mind. So I think that the argument that says we can make sure that the other lot do not do too much damage is an argument. It's not one that appeals to me. I prefer the other one. This is what we stand for. The more you vote for us, the more you're going to get this. And this is taking people out of taxation, just as we've shown we've done, making sure you have a fairer society, a more modern political system, making sure that you have an NHS which, whilst it responds to the needs of the patient, is nevertheless delivered free at the point of delivery. So all those things are positive values the Liberal Democrats have, very sellable. So you've got a couple of messages there.
Okay. One thing we haven't touched on so far, and it forms quite a substantial part of the book, and actually an absolutely fascinating part of the book, is your time in the Balkans, which, I mean, when you stepped down as Liberal Democrat leader, you could never have imagined what was about to engulf you. Now, we have a caller who'd like to ask you about your time in the Balkans. John is in Whitehall. John, hi.
Good evening, Paddy.
Hey, John.
I suppose a simple question. What was it like being a Governor-General under NATO command in the Balkans, considering you had a military career, and what you've already said, how your military career started at the end of empire, and in an odd way, being a Governor-General is sort of a weird, sort of a bit of a throwback to those days in an odd fashion?
Actually, John, I wasn't a Governor-General,
okay.
and actually I wasn't controlled by NATO.
Just a dictator.
Listen to it. I'll tell you what it was like in a second, but just so we get the facts right, NATO operated there quite separately from me. It was a twin-pillar operation. NATO looked after the security, I looked after the politics. And I was the international community's high representative, so it wasn't like being a soldier. I didn't have command of forces. It wasn't like being an imperial governor. What I was doing was acting for the international community as the watchdog to make sure that the Dayton Peace Agreement, upon which the peace of Bosnia was based, was properly followed. Now, what was it like? You want the honest truth, John? Bloody frightening. I mean, it is very frightening to be in someone else's country, which you've taken care to know as much about as you can, but you're pretty ignorant about its complexities, and to be taking decisions which could affect people's lives, sometimes even saying to elected politicians, sorry, that is contrary to the peace treaty you've signed, you can't do that. And to be able to second guess the opinion of the people there. It looks to me, and of course Ian will tell you, I had vast amounts of power there, and in theory I did, but all of that power rested on the consent of the people. And if the beloved Bosnians, who I got to love very much, didn't like what I was doing, it didn't matter how much power I had in the world, I still couldn't do it. And I had to be very careful to act in a way which I could always take a reasonable judgment, would have people supporting me, but it was bloody frightening, I'll tell you.
Do you go back?
Yeah, I go back quite often.
What's the reaction when you go back?
Well, it all depends, Some people liked me, some people didn't. A bit like politics, really. My job was those who wanted to pursue the national, to relive the war, I had to stop them doing things that I thought would lead us back to conflict. They don't like me very much. But the vast majority of Bosnians are very kind to me when they meet me in the street, say nice things to me. My wife and I had a wonderful time there. It's a beautiful place. Anybody listening, if you want to take a holiday, it is the most stunningly beautiful place. And they are wonderful people. Hospitality is in their DNA. And, by the way, it's far safer. Every person who worked for me, every woman who worked for me said, I'd rather walk at home in the streets of Sarajevo at night than I would in my own home city of wherever it is in Britain. And it is a very, very beautiful place indeed. Well worth a visit. Go and see it before it's too late.
But you saw some terrible things in your time there, didn't you? I mean, before you were actually appointed, I know you. I mean, you detail in the book some of the trips that you made. And I mean, you actually, your life was in danger.
Yeah, but their life was in far more danger, John. I mean, yes, I've given evidence 3 times before the war crimes tribunals for war crimes against war criminals. One of them was Milosevic. To be fair, Milosevic wasn't found guilty, but he was tried and died before the end. I gave evidence against him for the atrocities that I saw committed. But the remarkable thing is that even with that, this country is now, I believe, on its way to a peaceful future and will become in time one of the little jewels of Europe.
Well, Paddy Ashdown, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you over the last hour. We could have probably gone on for 3 hours, really, couldn't we? Because you've done so many things that are...
You say that to all the girls.
No, I absolutely don't. No, actually, I do on the programme, I'll admit it. But if you'd like to buy Paddy Ashdown's book, A Fortunate Life, I imagine it's available as an e-book. I bet you made them do that.
It is.
It's published by Aurum, and it's $9.99 in paperback. Now, just to tell you, next week, Kay Burley from Sky News will be on the programme. She's written a very racy novel called First Ladies. And Catherine Mayer, the London editor of Time magazine, will be here too. She has written a book called Immortality. I will be back tomorrow at 7 o'clock, and Clive Bull is coming up next. This is LBC 97.3.